This crusade was conducted entirely by Prince Edward, afterward Edward I of England. It is true that Louis IX of France, undeterred by the disasters which had previously befallen him, had with undiminished ardor sought to renew his efforts for the recovery of the Holy Sepulchre, and sailed from France for that purpose in 1270. But he had stopped short at Tunis, the king and people of which he had hoped to convert to Christianity. But although no decisive battles took place between the Moors and the Christians, the army of the latter was soon destroyed by the heat of the climate, by fatigue, by famine and pestilence, and the king himself died but little more than a month after his arrival on the shore of ancient Carthage. Prince Edward had joined the French army at Tunis with a slender body of knights, but, after the death of the French monarch and the abandonment of the enterprise, he had sailed for Syria with an army of only 1,000 knights and men at arms, and landed at Acre in 1270. But the knights of the chivalry of Palestine gathered eagerly around his standard and increased his force to 7,000. With this insignificant body of soldiery, weak in numbers but strong in courage, and in the capacity of their leader, Edward attacked the immense horde of Moslems who had been besieging Acre, caused them to retire, and following them to Nazareth, captured that city after a battle in which the infidels were defeated with great slaughter. But the reduction of Nazareth closed the military career of Edward in Palestine. After narrowly escaping death from a poisoned wound inflicted by a Moslem assassin, he returned to England in 1271, having first effected a truce of 10 years with the Sultan of Egypt. The defense of Palestine, or rather of Acre, the only point occupied by the Christians, as the titular capital of the Latin kingdom, was left to the knights of the three orders of chivalry, the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonic Knights. By them, the truce was repeatedly violated, and peaceable Moslem traders often plundered. Redress for these aggressions having been demanded in vain, the Sultan at length determined to extirpate the faithless Franks, and marched against Acre with an army of 200,000 men. After a siege of little more than a month, in which prodigies of valor were performed by the knights of the three military orders, Acre was taken in 1271 by assault at the cost of 60,000 Christian lives. The inhabitants who did not submit to the Moslem yoke escaped to Cyprus with the remains of the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonic Knights who had survived the slaughter. Thus, after a sanguinary contest of 200 years, the possession of the Holy Land was abandoned forever to the enemies of the cross. Thus ends the history of the Crusades. For 50 years afterward, the popes endeavored to instigate new efforts for the recovery of the holy places, but their appeals met with no response. The fanatical enthusiasm which had inspired the kings, the nobles, and the knights of Europe for 2 centuries had been dissolved, and the thirst for glory and the love of arms were thenceforth to be directed in different channels. It is not my intention to inquire into the influence exerted by the Crusades on the state of religion, of education, of commerce, or of society in Europe. The theme is an interesting one, but it is foreign to the subject of our discussion, which is the possible connection that may have existed between them and the origin of Freemasonry. But insofar as they may have favored the growth of municipal freedom and the perpetuation of the system of chivalry, it may be necessary in a future part of this discussion that these points should demand some attention. In the present point of view, the most important subject to attract our attention is the organization during the Crusades of 3 military orders of knighthood: the Knights Hospitallers, the Knights Templars, and the Teutonic Knights. It is through these, but principally through the second, that the attempt is made to find the origin of the Masonic institution in the time of the Crusaders. Whatever may have been the origin of the institution of chivalry, whether from the equestrian order of the Romans, from the Scandinavians, the Arabians, the Persians, or, what is far more probable, from the peculiar influences of the feudal system, it is certain that that form of knighthood, which was embodied in the organization of religious and military orders, took its rise in Palestine during the wars of the Crusades, and that before that era no such organizations of knighthood were known in Europe. The Knights Hospitallers of St. John, now better known as the Knights of Malta, was the first of the military and religious orders that was established in Palestine. Its origin must be traced to the Hospitallers of Jerusalem, a purely charitable institution established by certain merchants of Amalfi in the kingdom of Naples, who, trading in the East, built hospitals in Jerusalem for the entertainment and relief of poor and sick pilgrims about the middle of the 11th century. After the First Crusade had begun, many knights, laying aside their arms, united with the Hospitallers in the pious task of attending the sick. At length, Gerard, the rector of the hospital, induced his brethren to assume the vows of poverty, obedience, and chastity, and to adopt a peculiar costume consisting of a black robe bearing a white cross of 8 points on the left breast. This was in the year 1099. The knights, however, continued their peaceful vocation of attending the sick until 1118, when Gerard, having died, was succeeded by Raymond de Puy as rector. The military spirit of Raymond was averse to the monastic seclusion which had been fostered by his predecessor. He therefore proposed a change in the character of the society by which it should become a military order devoted to the protection of Palestine from the attacks of the infidels. The members gladly acceded to this proposition, and taking new vows at the hands of the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the military order of Knights of St. John of Jerusalem was established in the year 1118. The order continued to reside in Palestine during its occupation by the Christians of the Latin Kingdom, taking an active part in all the wars of the 8 Crusades. When the city of Acre fell beneath the victorious army of the Sultan of Egypt, Hospitallers with the knights of the other 2 orders who had escaped the slaughter which attended the siege and followed on the surrender, fled to Cyprus. Thence they repaired to the island of Rhodes, where they remained for 200 years under the title of the Knights of Rhodes, and afterward permanently established themselves at Malta, where, with a change of name to that of the Knights of Malta, they remained until the island was taken possession of by Napoleon in the year 1798. This was virtually the end of the career of these valiant knights, although to this day the order retains some remnant of its existence in Italy. The Order of Knights Templars was established in the year 1118 by Hugh de Payens, Godfrey de St. Aldemar, and 7 other knights whose names history has not preserved. Uniting the characters of the monk and the soldier, they took the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience in the presence of the Patriarch of Jerusalem. Baldwin, the king of Jerusalem, assigned them a residence, a part of his palace, which stood near the site of the former temple, and as a place for an armory, the street between the palace and the temple, from which circumstance they derived their name of Templars. The Templars took a most active part in the defense of Palestine during the 2 centuries of the Crusades. They had also established houses called preceptories in every country of Europe, where many of the knights resided. But the head of the order was always in Palestine. At the close of the contests for the conquest of the Holy Land, when Acre fell and the Latin kingdom was dissolved, the Templars made their escape to Europe and were distributed among their various preceptories.